Welcome, everybody, to the Modern CFO show, where we sit down with some of the best and brightest minds in finance from some of the largest companies in the world to share their knowledge and industry insights in 2025. And today, joining me is Neil Shah, the leading CFO in the non-profit space and also CEO of Altruva AI. Neil, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks a lot, Zach. I'm excited.
Yeah. Just before we start, can you kindly just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about your current roles and your current business ventures.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I am a CFO for the nonprofit space in the US. And so I work with nonprofit organizations as an interim or fractional CFO.
Mhm.
My experience has been mainly with education nonprofits over the last 20 some odd years. In various capacities, either as an outsourced CFO, fractional CFO for smaller nonprofit organizations. I've also been the in-house CFO for some larger nonprofit organizations. So budget sizes anywhere from like $1 to $2 million US annually in terms of their budgets, relatively small organizations, all the way to being CFO of like 350 $400 million organizations. And so kind of had that span there over the last 20 years, mainly with education nonprofits. And currently, right now, I'm interim CFO for a handful of organizations. And so I provide the CFO management, kind of coming in as a CFO has transitioned out and coming in to kind of stabilize their financial operations, improve their processes, their systems, the finance team culture, all in an effort to be able to prepare them to set up for their permanent CFO eventually to kind of take back over or to find a permanent CFO and to bring them in and really set them up for success.
Right, I see.
I'm also sorry. And so I've got a couple of that. So I do that on the fractional interim side, and then I've also launched an AI company over the last 3 months or so. And that AI company is going to create AI agents for the nonprofit finance space. And so everything from automating accounts payable and procurement, automating journal entries, bank reconciliations, things like that, and then also looking to be sort of like a CFO assistant, so to speak, where it can provide analysis on your data, create dashboards and visual charts and graphs, eventually slide decks and things like that that can be used for finance committees and presentations. And just answering your general questions about like what is our budget in a certain division last year or something like that. What was our revenue trend over the last 3 years? Things of that nature.
Yeah. And actually, I'm super excited about this because I can't wait to pick your brains a little bit more about
Mhm,
the AI side of things because I know you're really into
mhm,
this space and having your own company, I'm sure there's lots of things that people can pick up upon and definitely learn from. Because of your like experience, working with so many vast different companies, from your smaller to the larger end. I actually just wanted to kick things off and ask that in the non-profit space, especially, there are a few more departments that you may not have to necessarily liaise with your more regular companies. There's always additional teams, lots more staff as well from time to time. So I wanted to just kick off and ask, how do you effectively communicate with some of these teams that may not be as common? So your fundraising, your programs teams, what's your communication process?
yeah. Yeah, I think so. With nonprofit organizations, it's still we're still businesses. We're still needing to have balanced budgets and create surpluses and ensure there's cash flow and such. But the ultimate goal is not so much to increase shareholder value. It is more about being able to continue to invest into the program for whatever mission the organization is in. And in that regard, then in a for-profit organization, you might have a product team or a services team that actually delivers services or products to customers or clients. In nonprofit organizations, there's usually programmatic teams that are delivering some level of service, whether it be a charter school network that provides educational services, right? That runs schools, and so the oversight of that. Other organizations, they might be delivering some other type of service to the community, and so those are the programmatic teams that are delivering the work. They're on the ground. They're mission driven. You generally, nonprofit organizations also have a development team that's raising money as well, and so you're looking to from individuals, from corporations, from foundations, and fundraising is generally a certain portion of the nonprofit's budget, depending on what the nonprofit does. It could be anything from a very small amount because the nonprofit provides a lot of services and sells services to other organizations as well, or products and services. Or but a lot of nonprofits also, the majority of their revenue is fundraising fundraising. And so they're in order to
Mm.
continue to maintain operations, have money for payroll and for their costs and such, they have to raise money. And so uh, the finance team has always been, in my mind, a great liaison between understanding what program needs to what resources program needs to be able to deliver on those services, and helping the development and fundraising teams really understand what needs to be raised and how they can raise it. And so sometimes there can be conflict between a program team, a development team, because the development team might say, well, we can't raise money for that type of program. We can't, there's nobody out there to raise money for, or how are you going to spend those dollars, right? And program usually needs to rely on finance to help them, determine how to spend those dollars. And so I look at program development and finance as sort of like a triangle where, finance is kind of supporting, it's three legs of a triangle, but finance is really there to kind of connect the bridge between finance and development and program. So that's always been there's always some level of healthy conflict within these various teams, and I've always kind of come in with a mentality around trying to partner with those divisions and being able to help them understand each other, and understand the needs of finance as well, in terms of being able to understand what that program needs, that specific program needs, but then finance has to kind of take the broader organizational view as well, as like how that affects the entire organization as well.
I mean, obviously, like because then you've got, like I said, those that kind of triangle. You need to make sure that everyone's in unison, so that communication
Right.
is going to be really effective to make sure that the end goal of the business is or the nonprofit is still aligned in that sense. You know, there's going to be
That's
some
exactly right.
commonalities, but that communication is going to be key.
That's exactly right.
And I also wanted to ask, like, especially in the non-profit space, there can often be a lot of, I'd say, broken processes that may need improving. I think simply because, in a lot of businesses, they operate quite similarly, right? You know, if you're a SaaS company, you're going to have quite a lot of the same processes, the same automation that can be
Mhm.
moved from one business to another. I know, from our previous conversations that the non-profit space is a little bit different. You know, sometimes there's not always that kind of guideline as to how things should operate. So where you've worked in a number of different companies, you can then come in from previous experiences and see, really what needs to be changed for an overall company improvement. So I just wanted
Yeah.
to ask, when you're coming into a business, what kind of needs updating first? What some examples of some positive changes that you've made in some previous roles?
Right, right. It starts with the idea that with nonprofits, they're generally resource restricted in a lot of ways. Nonprofits generally are always are always slowest to adopt new technologies or upgrade their technologies. And when they do, it's usually more focused on the program, which makes sense because that's what they're delivering. But then
Hmm.
because of that, the finance functions always are the ones that are always left behind in terms of like getting the newest updates or the newest types of technology and such. Um, and so whenever I come into an organization, I usually do an evaluation of both the process and the systems. How old are the systems? How manual are the processes? And most of the time, I find that because there hasn't been resources available to upgrade systems over time, that a lot of the manual processes have been created because of the system, not being able to do what it needs to do. And so you end up with these technologies that are somewhat older, that only provides some level of automation, but instead then you have a lot of manual work, a lot of manual downloading out of one system and then manipulation in Excel or Google Sheets and then going back into another system. And so what I like to do is kind of look at the entire process, overall from a macro piece around, how do we account for revenue? So revenue's coming in, they get estimates from the various divisions. How is that flowing in? How is that evaluated? And then how is it coming into your accounting system or your budgeting system and such? And most of the time, it's some kind of manual process, as I mentioned. Same thing with things like accounts payable. I can't tell you how many nonprofits I still walk into today where they still print out checks, everything is filled out, filed in a manual filing cabinet. And because of that, the invoices that they get via email, they then end up having to print out themselves because everything is that's that system, right? And so looking at how do we make them, whatever is manual, a little bit more efficient, um, And then two, being able to then look at the systems itself and seeing what is possible in terms of automation and upgrading over some time. Maybe it might be 6 months, it might be 18 months, it might be 36 months. And so I look at process, I look at systems, and then I wrap that all around as, how's the culture of the finance team? Like, especially in my situation where, a CFO has departed. And so I like to evaluate, like, what is the culture? How have they been supported? How have they been trained? Because when I look at finance, I look at finance as two pieces of it. One being a very um, accounting view in terms of accuracy, integrity of the data, compliance, all of that. A lot of the organizations that I work with, get a lot of government funding, and so there's a lot of compliance. All of that is very, very important. But I think what's even more important is how the finance team relates to the rest of the organization in terms of service. And do we come in with a customer service mentality? Do we come in with a mentality of trying to help, or is it just no, you can't do it that way? And my philosophy has always been, well, you can't do it that way, but let's find a few other ways that we might be able to work, to be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish, right? And so look at process, systems, and then the overall culture. With the process, you can do some process improvement events. You can run through the current state of the process, and look for ideas on how things might be a little. And a lot of times, people haven't talked about this or looked at this, for so long. And so just getting them in a room together and just being able to walk through, like, this is how we're doing things now. This is how, these are some ways that we could make it a little bit more efficient. What's a future state look like? And then you can implement those types of improvements relatively fast, even without the need of, expensive technology, all in the idea of, like, okay, well, we've done this immediate improvement now, but down the road, we're still going to need to have this system, or we need to have these systems talk to each other. And so you start to create more of a longer term plan around, like, improving the systems in general, such that you get so much more efficiency down the road, which is what we all need, right? Improved or efficient financial operations are going to make the organization move that much more effectively, right? Across the organization, program leaders are going to understand what their budgets are much more better. Development's going to understand what they need to raise for, and then you end up, hopefully being able to be more efficient just with the size of the finance team as well, which is then provides more resources again to the organization.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think it's from an outside perspective, it's you can't hit the nail on the head where it's a lot of non-profits don't really have a lot of the funding. There's not a lot of cash in the
Hmm.
bank there to always just invest into these things. And I think
Exactly.
sometimes they can have that more old school business mindset, where things are done manually. And
Right.
as much as I'm an advocate and I do love to see, the 90s methods still in play in 2025,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
always good to kind of update these things.
Yes.
And just on that as well, do you find that, you may not be able to go and do the overhaul that you want, for
Mhm.
pushbacks for certain reasons.
Right.
But especially the finance team, do you find that even just making a small improvement here and there is going to massively impact the production for everyone? But also, in terms of the implementation, do you have a certain strategy for that? Especially if employees are maybe a little bit older, or they've had the same process there for 10 years. It's really trying
Yeah.
to get someone to move away from that paperwork. Do you have a process to really speed up the implementation as well?
Yeah, I'd say that even more important than going through the process improvement days, or however you structure it, change management is by far the most important thing. So
Right.
getting the change management, and helping the internal finance team on board, right? And like you said, people that have been there for a very long time are used to doing things a certain way. And so helping them understand why, and that it's going to be initially a little bit harder as we're learning a new way of doing things, but that this is helping them see the light at the end of the tunnel, I think is
Mm.
is is very important, right? And then the change management across the organization as well. If an organization doesn't use purchase orders right now, or it doesn't have a procurement process right now, or it doesn't have a process to review contracts, things people just do whatever they want, right? It's important that we implement these functions and these processes, but it's going to be hard for the other leaders, or if it's a school, it's the school principals, right? Or if it's it's other departmental leaders. They're just not used to doing it. They feel like it's an extra step and more work for them, and helping them understand why it's important that we do this, but that why it's their overall budget management, or their overall efficiency of their department is going to be improved because of it. So more importantly than actually mapping out the process is helping them understand the change and the why. And it's different in every organization. But it's I think it's not looked at first, and I think it's looked at more of like, okay, well, let's create the process first, and then we'll figure out how to explain it to everybody.
Mm.
Whereas, like, I feel like it's more important to get the buy-in internally first, and then externally before you even go through that work, so that people can understand why you're doing it, and then eventually accept it. And I think that process around change management is something that you begin with, but you continue that process throughout what you're implementing or changing, whether it be a process improvement or a new system. And you're communicating, you're keeping people regularly updated with change. And I think some of that is kind of forgotten as well as you kind of get into the mix of process improvement and systems implementation. You forget about the comms a little bit, the communications and helping them, regularly understand, the timeline and all of that. And I think when you invest a little bit more in the change management, you end up having a more successful project for sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's
Yeah.
actually quite interesting. Actually, I never would have thought about it that way because I think
Mhm.
sometimes the board will just say, right, hey, look, we need to improve this process. This is the new thing we're going to do. You roll it out to the rest of the organization, but they might not
Right.
have the buy-in. They might have a bit of resentment there. But if everyone's aligned beforehand,
Mhm.
and then you make the change, everyone's willing to put that effort in to really speed up the process.
That's
Okay,
right.
interesting. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. Exactly. Exactly.
So also in terms of the process kind of processes of the non-profits, when reports and accounts are being presented like within a business, how important do you feel it is to have a financial story behind those numbers, and can finance leaders become better at sharing this information with the rest of the board?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've in all my time working with nonprofit organizations, I've presented hundreds of times to various finance committees and nonprofits boards, and I found at the beginning it used to be like, here's the P&L, here's the balance sheet. It was like an Excel screenshot, or sometimes it was just logging into the accounting system and just showing them on a projector, right? And it's just a bunch of numbers, right? And when you're looking at just numbers, maybe the treasurer, if he or she is an accountant, or if they're in the finance world, they'll probably get it. Other members of the finance committee might as well, if they're on the finance committee. The board, for the most part, I can't tell you how many times I've seen glossy eyes, whenever it comes to the finance president. Oh gosh, and they're just sitting there just taking in and looking at a bunch of numbers, right?
Mm.
Um, I think when you're trying to help, whether it be internal management, it be your senior leaders that you work alongside with, your CEO, or the board, the ability to be able to translate that data into a story is so paramount for any CFO. Um, when you can connect the dollars, whether it be accounting, what's already happened, or the forecast, what we think is going to happen, and be able to connect it to their work, connect it to the mission of the organization, connect it to something that they believe in, or what they work on every single day. I think that's really where the value of the CFO really truly comes in terms of connecting those dots, making those partnerships, and helping them understand. And so what I've always done is, what I've started to do over the last many years is taking that data and putting a story behind it together. And so a lot of times before ChatGPT, it was, just looking at, a few, looking at our balance sheet, our income statement, maybe creating some slides, some charts. We've done some of this before. But I think with the advent of AI, what I've started to do is, allow AI to kind of help me tell that story a little bit visually, help me do a little bit of that analysis a little bit. And put together a narrative that has a beginning and a middle and an end to it. Sometimes I'll come into an organization that I'm new to, and for me to better understand the organization, but also for the board to, and likely the board hasn't seen some of the history. I might take 10 years of data, so I'll take like, every nonprofit for the most part gets some kind of like annual audit. It's just required. You have an annual auditing process, and you run through that. And so I'll take the annual audited financials, and I'll plot them over the last 10 years, and I'll track all the revenues, all the various revenues, all the various expenses. I'll look at any one-time events that may have occurred, like if there's sale of building or some like one-time funding that may have come in, that sometimes skews the numbers a little bit. And I'll run an analysis through AI, and I'll kind of look at, because the AI allows us to like not have to do some of the manual calculations on growth rates and these types of things. Like it just kind of does it, which is great. And then I'll take that and I'll create a narrative around, over the last 5 years, our revenue has been declining. Our personnel and our salaries have been increasing at a faster rate than our government revenue, let's say.
Right.
Or that, in the last few years, we've been operating at a loss, but the ending net income has been positive because we got this big one-time event, whether it be COVID dollars that we got a few years ago, or whatever it might. Well, we sold a building and there was a big one-time gain, on the
Mm.
financials. And so, when these board members every year look at their audited financial statements, when they get presented, they're seeing a number at the end, which is great. Yeah, that's it. Everything looks positive, right? But when you actually break out some of these take out these one-time events, or you're analyzing over several years, you get to tell a story. The last few years, the net income has been growing, has been positive, but it's because of these one-time events. And when you take out these one-time events, because of our school enrollment, or because of our programmatic revenue, or our government, whatever it might be, our fundraising dollars, or our sale of services, they have actually been declining. And that we haven't really been focused on that as an organization, because we've been thinking about the fact that our net income has still been positive, right? And so you start to connect, not just a number and our series of numbers, but being able to show visually, this is our net income as is, but when you take out this event, this is what it's actually doing, right?
Right.
Over the last 3 years, and just having 4 or 5 slides to be able to tell a general story to a board, this is how we started, this is where we are over the last few years, and if we continue at this rate, this is where we're going, right? Keeping it very simple, but translating those numbers into a slide with a visual with very little amount of numbers on it, but just high level, I think has always helped me communicate a story to a finance committee and to a board,
Mm.
in a way that just throwing a bunch of balance sheets and P&Ls, it just doesn't help. Now, you have to include that information as a part of your presentation, because the finance committee should look at the detail, right? They should have access to that, right? But I throw it in an appendix. I'll put it behind, say, hey, finance committee, if you want to look at line by line, here you go, right? It's there, but I'm focused more on the story and what the story is right now. And I think that's really helped. And I've done that internally with leaders as well, where I don't just throw a bunch of budgeted line items, with just rows and rows of Excels on a PowerPoint, but I'll go division by division and help them understand what their mini story is as a part of the
Right.
entire organization. So translating the numbers into a visual storytelling approach, I think, is one of the most important traits, and skills that any CFO right now, whether you're in the nonprofit space or any space, can learn right now, because that's really what's going to make you kind of stand out in terms of partnering with those various divisions and partnering with your board.
Mm. I was gonna say, and also I feel like just thinking out loud as you're speaking, I think like maybe that's something that can be moved on to other departments as well. If you're in sales or you're in a meeting, it's just we know what we know, and sometimes, especially in finance, there's a lot of keywords, things that can become confusing very quickly, and you need to keep people engaged. So
Hmm.
naturally, when you talk numbers, a lot of people do tend to switch off a little bit. So to keep them engaged, keep it a little bit fun and a lot more simple, you're going to get that message for a little bit clearer. So I
Yeah,
guess for a lot of finance leaders out there that I'm sure you can help with, really the thing to take away from that is really just to keep things simple and learn a bit more about
right.
that storytelling on
That's
that.
right. That's exactly right.
You,
Yeah.
you did mention, of course, and I've been really keen to pick your brains about this because I'm really interested about what you guys are doing over at Altruva. But you mentioned in that storytelling process, you're using a lot of AI there to help with that process and among other things within the businesses. So I'd
Mhm.
love for you to just kind of explain a little bit more about the space, like over the next few years. Are you confident that finance functions are going to be replaced by AI? And how is this going to happen? Like, what do you think the business benefits are with the AI revolution at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I definitely think AI it's not even coming, it's here. And I think everyone needs to embrace it. And like I was saying earlier, nonprofits are always the kind of the last to adopt new technologies. And so looking at, my experience working with nonprofits, the many that I've worked with over the years, feeling like I have, a deep understanding of how nonprofit finance functions work. Uh, so I have that level of credibility to be able to come into an organization and say, well, I understand, that we need to account for restricted funding this way. Like with nonprofits, I didn't explain earlier, but you get certain grants, right? And so you get a grant, it's intended for a purpose. So if you get a $1 million grant, right? Let's say your budget's $10 million and you get $1 million grant from, the Gates Foundation, let's say it's intended for a purpose. You have to account for it for that purpose, and so you have to spend it according to that. So a budget is created, and then we need to be able to report back to the Gates Foundation that we spent how we spent this $1 million, right? So you need to be able to count. You can only spend those dollars on that. So in your system should be able to show the $1 million coming in, but how we spent the $1 million to that grant, and
Right.
we didn't use it. So restricted funding, restricted fund accounting, these types of things are really important for a nonprofit. Um, Whereas with a lot of businesses, you don't really have to do things like that.
Mm.
And so I, I think there are opportunities in both in two areas. And so what we're doing right now is helping, we're starting off with just getting information faster to decision makers. And so right now, the CEO of a nonprofit, if they have a question about their revenue, let's say I want to know what our revenue was for this program over the last 3 years. Just a simple question, right?
Mm.
Right now, they might ask the CFO. The CFO will then ask the VP of finance. The VP of finance might go and ask somebody else on their team. They'll run a report. Maybe 24 hours later, the CEO might get something, and it's not exactly what they wanted, right? And so then they'll go back. And so like getting information to either the CFO or anybody else, a leader in the organization, is a deep process, right? And it's a very manual process in terms of getting that information. I want to be able to create a solution where if the data is available, and this is the organizational specific data, right? You go into ChatGPT right now, it's trained on whatever it's been trained on, right? So it doesn't know your data, it doesn't know the organization's data,
Correct.
unless you upload something to it, right? Unless you give it something, right? And then it can analyze it, right? And so what we're doing right now is testing, being able to take, a certain nonprofits or financial data. So let's say their, historical P&Ls of profit and losses over the last 3 or 4 years, their balance sheets, their audits, their program level budgets, very specific information, being able to take into a database and be able to prompt, a question, that exact question: what is my revenue trend for this program? Right now, what we're doing is we have the AI agent, which is what we can call a digital employee, or someone that does a task, right? It takes that information, it finds it in the database, whatever is relevant to that prompt, right? Whatever you've asked, it goes to the large language model, a ChatGPT or Gemini, and asks it to answer that question, and then it'll shoot
Mm.
back the answer. So if the CEO, instead of asking the CFO and asking the VP of finance, all of that, has a chatbot on their computer, embedded into whatever they're already using, Microsoft Teams or Slack or WhatsApp or whatever it is, you just ask that AI employee, that's a user on that, what is our revenue trend? And it will go and ask that question. You go find that data, go ask the question, come back in it. So we're testing that now with several clients in terms of just queries. Like we have a question about our financials. What is the answer to that question, right?
Mm.
Very, very relatively, very, very basic. Eventually we'll get to the point where it is, create a chart of our revenue trend for that program over the last 3 years. Create a dashboard of our most recent financial statements, or create a slide deck for our finance committee, right? And it ends up becoming sort of like a CFO assistant, so to speak, where the CFO can use it to get fast information. The CEO or chief operating officer can use it. Program leaders might be able to use it. And for organizations that are very, very small, nonprofits, where they don't have a CFO, instead they have like a bookkeeper, or they maybe have somebody who kind of manages and closes their books, but doesn't really have
Mm.
a CFO. It really truly becomes like a CFO assistant, a fractional type of CFO assistant for the CEO to be able to lean in on to get that information, both from a information gathering purpose, but also an analysis purpose. So there's like information that we can get faster through our own data and I think AI helps with that. And so that's what we're building right now. Eventually, then we'll start to look at operator type of agents, where you're actually now doing a task, and actually doing a function inside and I see down the road, I see accounts payable being automated. I see procurement being automated, contract review being automated, accounting being automated, to the point where these AI agents are working behind the scenes. You're receiving invoices electronically via email. Let's say right now a human might be opening it up, entering in, unless you have like a Ramp or Brex or some of these. A lot of nonprofits don't. A human is still opening it up. So right now, then with an AI agent, the agent could actually open up the invoice, read what's on there, and then go into the accounting system through API and actually enter in that invoice. Then chat to the accounts payable manager, the controller. I've entered my batch of invoices. I found these two invoices where I couldn't understand what the grant code was, and so then
Mm.
the accounts payable manager, the controller, can go and enter and correct it, but then also tell the AI agent, the next time you see this invoice, use this grant code instead, right? To the point
Right.
where I think, then you get to the same with like recurring journal entries and, bank reconciliations. You imagine, instead of doing a month-end bank reconciliation, bank reconciliations are done every day, right? Like every day you're getting the cash, whatever has been cleared out of the bank, and it's just being done automatically, right? It's just being synced. I think 4 or 5 years from now, I think a lot of the manual that I mentioned earlier around like the accuracy, the validation of the data, the compliance of the work, accounting, accounts payable, these types of functions that are very manual in a lot of ways, that are ones that are truly the back office, right? I think those are the ones that are going to be much more automated, and I think finance teams, for the most part, are going to have mainly the people who interact with other humans. So like budgeting and forecasting, helping you explain to your budget, to program leaders. I think those types of functions are still very human based, and I think those are those are where you add real value to each program. Whereas like the accounting, the compliance adds value to the entire organization, but it is very manual, very behind the scenes. And so I think a lot of these functions for any organization, but specifically for nonprofits, are going to become much more efficient because every nonprofit is resource derived or now or restrained. And so being able to manually create automations that will reduce the cost for a finance team to be able to perform these services. It's very important functions, but it's still very manual. Being able to then automate that at a much lower cost, right? That then provides resources back to the organization. Where you're spending smaller on a finance team, you can spend a little bit more on that end. Now, the area where I'm really interested is not just that piece, but then the other piece around that is being how ethical can we be with this? How responsible can we be with this in the sense of like,
Mm,
sure, you might have less accounts payable, accounting people, to the point where you may not eventually even need those functions. AI is doing it all, right? But instead of necessarily just laying off that staff, right? Like you're going to close the FTE position, that role, right? But instead of just laying them off, because yes, that's a pure cost savings, right? That you're doing, are there opportunities to upskill those people into other functions into the organization? So whether it be inside the finance, could you upskill an accountant to be an FP&A person that is focused on providing value directly to a department instead, right?
mm,
Or could you upskill that person to a programmatic role instead, right? Could you take that person and put them into a programmatic role and actually delivering services? So if there's a way to reduce the cost of the finance team while also potentially trying to save the person themselves, such that you get a win-win for the organization and you get a win-win for the staff as well, for the person as well. So that's really what I'm focusing on, and how to make the finance team more efficient, but how do we do it in a very ethically and responsible way? Because it's coming, it's going to come regardless of a nonprofit wants to believe it or not. And I think in a world where we can get ahead of that by automating these processes now, but then finding the ways to be responsible with the people and be ethical with the people too, I think is really, really
mm.
key.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, to be honest, based on what you said there in that solution, I've not seen that yet. So this is really,
Mhm,
really exciting, right? And I think
mhm,
there are even some conversations I've had with many different people. I think people are still burying their head in the sands a little bit about what's coming. They
mhm,
don't quite want to listen
mhm,
to it. Maybe don't quite believe it, but I think based on what you said is very, very true, right? I think
mhm,
there's automation that's going to be happening whether we like it or
mhm.
not.
Right.
And I think it's kind of a question that no one's really asking right now. And I've not had this conversation with anybody is what happens when AI comes? What happens to the staff? Is there just going to be
Mhm,
mass layoffs, or you've hit the nail on the head? Could we
mhm.
do something else? Could we not just look at them and lay them off, but could they be upskilled? Could they then go
Yeah,
into something else?
that's
Which
right.
I think is very, very, very important as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I just quickly wanted to finish off on a bit of a quick fire round, actually, just to
Okay.
pick your brains on a couple of things. But I'd love to ask, what is the most powerful KPI that most businesses should be checking regularly in your experience?
If I'm speaking specifically about nonprofits, I think not enough nonprofits understand cash versus budget, especially like the boards and sometimes the CEOs as well, if they're not coming from a finance background. And so you think about your budget, you got this big grant, right? And now your budget is balanced. And but if that revenue is not coming in, we all know, right? That's not cash in the bank. It's not going to help your payroll. And so understanding your cash flow, and especially specifically your days cash on hand. Sometimes I'll make the mistake and write DCOAH, right? Days cash on hand on a slide, and people are like, "What is that?" So I've done a better job of trying to write out days cash on hand. But understanding how much cash we have in the bank as an organization, I think is really, really key for regardless if you're a $1 million nonprofit or $100 million or $200 million nonprofit. Um, and what's also really important, though, that's key there. A lot of people already do this, right? Or a lot of CFOs already add the days cash on hand. But what I see missed a lot, and I've done this myself quite a bit, is not providing a comp against that, a comparable. And so, a similar size. So what our days cash on hand is 60 or it's 100 or whatever that doesn't have any meaning unless you compare it. And so you compare it to a similar size organization, similar space, similar, revenue size or employee size. And our days cash on hand is this. But a similar size organization, I found three other similar size organizations. Ours is 60 and theirs are 100 each on average. And so we are more work to do. And so I think that's the key. Measuring cash, but comparing it also to similar size organization is really, really important.
Yeah, guys, I guess it doesn't really make much sense unless there's anything to compare it with. You could have
Right.
20, but what is that in the grand scheme of things,
Exactly.
against your competitors or other people?
Exactly right.
What's your favorite AI tool at the moment? We're going to put Altruva aside, obviously, because
Yeah.
for obvious reasons. Well, yeah, any kind of great AI tools that you're using at the moment across the different companies?
Well, ChatGPT is definitely like the go-to. I discovered ChatGPT like 2 weeks after it released back in like late November 2022 or
Mhm.
early 2023, or early December 2022. Um, and so it's still like my go-to in terms of just being like my, go-to on everything business related, especially as I've been growing Altruva. We have developers and such, of course. I'm not a vibe coder, so to speak, just yet. But a lot of the functions that you would normally have in any kind of startup, but you would need some kind of help for, I've been using AI to be my marketing lead, my strategic thought partner, my sort of legal advisor a little bit. And so I think that's been helpful. I've been experimenting a lot with voice as well, like just talking to ChatGPT, and that's something that I'm getting a little bit more comfortable with. I think Claude from Anthropic is really good for writing, and so
Oh, yes.
I'll ask it for ideas, and it'll generate something for me, and then I'll be able to take a better stab at editing that for my own like posting or whatever. And I think it does a little bit better job than ChatGPT does on that end. I think video, Google's Gemini has been great. The VO3 model that they have, or the
Okay.
service that they have through Gemini, it creates 8-second clips that are far better than you can get it from ChatGPT or anywhere else. And so I think those have kind of been my three go-tos. But there's a lot of like specific, like napkin.ai. I have to say them because they've just been incredible in terms of like taking a prompt or taking three bullets that you want to put on a slide and creating a visual around it. And I think right now it's still free. It's just that's been incredible as well.
Oh, okay. I haven't heard of that one actually. Sorry, can you say that one again for the audience?
Napkin.ai. Yeah. Free
Interesting.
free plug for them, not being paid for it. I've been using it in my
Just to put it out
own
there.
slide decks, and it's been really great. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, I'll have a look at that myself actually for our business. That's great. And lastly, what advice would you give to other CFOs and finance leaders in 2025?
I think the storytelling key is really, really important. Being able to stop putting as much data on a deck for an external or board presentation, and putting a little bit more visual, less numbers. All of that I think is really, really key. Just having the mentality around being customer service oriented first and being partnership driven at first. I think a lot of CFOs come in, as an accountant, as a controller, and eventually as a CFO, and it just has a very compliance minded, which is important. Like I said, like it's not important, but the ability to be able to say not just no, but this is how we could do it instead. Being that partner, being that let's find a solution together, and not just being the police that just says no. I
Yeah,
think is one of the biggest trademarks of a successful CFO. I think it's been easier for me because I didn't come in as an accountant. I've never been a staff accountant, a controller. I just kind of came into the space and learned the accounting, as I grew as a CFO. But I came in more as just a partner and as someone that can connect the dots a little bit and speak the different various languages around program and development in these areas. And so I think that helps a little bit. And so um, being able to say no, but we could do this instead, I think is one of the biggest piece of advice I'd give to any CFO, especially in the nonprofit space, but really anywhere.
yeah, perfect. And sometimes, coming in and not your, your finance controller or accounting ways in becoming a CFO can sometimes actually be beneficial, right? Because you're not, you haven't learned things a certain way. You can come in with a
Right.
much more open mind, and it's more beneficial too.
Definitely
And on that
helps.
note, I just want to say very, very excited about what you guys are doing over at Altruva based on some of
Thank you.
the solutions you said there. So we're going to be making sure that we keep up to date on what you guys are doing. And for audience out there, if anyone's interested about, your AI tool, what's the best way to reach out with you? Website or LinkedIn that people can get in touch with you there, Neil?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn on my personal page, Neil Shah, and Altruva has got a company page, and the website is altruva.ai, Altruva.ai.
Perfect. So yeah, and again for the audience, if anyone wants to reach out to Neil and interested about his AI solution, please do reach out. And I want to say to you, Neil, thank you so much again for your time. We really do
Sure.
appreciate it. Make sure you have a lovely weekend, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the opportunity, Zach. Appreciate it.